His visit comes as differences seem to be growing.
What up, though? He's doing some DashCammin. This DashCammin it over on 94 westbound, going down toward Detroit. We're at 9 Mile Road.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
It's foggy, rather groggy. It's fucking raining. It's around 46 degrees.
The White House saying
it's about 24.6 miles per gallon. It's about 4:36 in the p.m.
And quote, this will be a long battle.
Just got done cutting in a bunch of shit at Waterman. I didn't take a video walkthrough. I should have. This guy ain't providing no fucking drafting because I'm only going 45, so I gotta get over it.
Support for Israel. Alone among American presidents.
Swung right out in front of somebody and got going as fast as him real fast, so it's all good.
Israeli prime ministers goes back decades. And I think those divergences are clear, and yet both sides have a real stake. And I think we're now in the third month of this war without an open breach. I don't think there'll be one, in large part because...
An open breach between the U.S. and Israel.
Exactly. I don't think there'll be one, in large part because certainly from President Biden's perspective, none of his predecessors...
Alright, let's take these corners. Passion.
Israeli prime minister.
That fucking shitty Ram can stay on fucking course. So can this four-wheel drive beast!
And so do you think we are likely to see a shift towards...
But I got some shitty-ass tires, too.
More targeted attacks.
Too many G's around this.
Bombing, or
like 70's good.
Forge ahead with what he says.
Any faster.
More of squirrel large-scale assaults.
No, I think the Israelis probably... I think the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, will call the shots more than the United States. I suspect that the Israelis have reached the conclusion, both because mobilizing 360,000 reservists have a terrible effect on the Israeli morale and the Israeli economy. I think the Israelis, by the end of January, will in fact return to much more intelligence-driven, focused operations. Not so much heavy emphasis on artillery.
The visibility is about a quarter mile.
That will do a lot, hopefully.
So I'm just checking the left divot for any puddles to make any hydroplane.
This is
you know what I'm saying?
And it should minimize Palestinian deaths and casualties. But there's one other reality, and that is the Israelis are clearly going to be operating in Gaza at some level, I suspect, for months.
Well, and this raises the question of what will happen after the conflict, after the war.
Now we're going 73. I mean, this is a little
another place where the U.S. and Israel seem
but these guys are up in front of me doing it.
The Biden administration wants to see the Palestinian Authority have a role. Netanyahu has
they got new tires.
Do you think that
that's the difference? I'm going to creep towards the middle of my lane here, so in case there's anything under that overpass on the side, it won't pull me.
This coalition, which happens to have two of the most extremist right-wing ministers as part of it, that he's going to have to figure out a very, very fine line of navigating both rejecting American advice on one hand, but then also privately conveying that the possibility of a Palestinian Authority return may be possible. I think it's not possible now, so Mr. Netanyahu may actually benefit from the fact that it may take weeks, if not months, to do what the administration wants, which is to create a revitalized Palestinian Authority. The real conflict, I think, may come with the Biden administration's insistence on tethering Gaza to a political solution. And it's clear the administration's view is, however dominant it may be, two states.
Just in a couple sentences, do you think this war has fundamentally changed the U.S.-Israel relationship, or does it remain more or less what it was?
I think it remains the same. It's going to be tense, and I think Israel needs a new prime minister to set that relationship between the U.S. and Israel much firmer and stronger ground.
Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thanks so much for working with us.
Thanks for the 3/4 mile.
What if Thor wasn't
chill here?
That is the kind of alternate story Marvel Studios' first animated series, What If, on Disney Plus takes on. Season 2, which is premiering now, introduces an original Native American Marvel heroine, Kahorti. She's a Mohawk woman who goes on a quest to discover her power. Ava Pukach, member station WRVO, reports the episode takes place almost entirely
going 55 now.
Doug George Canantillo, an Aquaneski Mohawk, is a cultural advisor
going 55.
But he couldn't relate to them.
There wasn't anything in the media at all that showed us in a positive way. Nothing.
George Conatillo says the few Native characters, if any, were too often on the edge of the story and portrayed using offensive stereotypes.
Those figures were angry and aggressive and, had war painted on it. We were always in a state of conflict and warfare. And that wasn't, that couldn't have turned you off as a kid.
That's changing. Meet Kahorti, a new original Marvel character. She's a young Mohawk woman living in the sovereign Haudenosaunee Confederacy prior to the colonization of America. The area today is part of northern New York State in the Adirondack Mountains. The characters speak in the Mohawk language throughout, with subtitles. Here, Kahorti learns about a magical portal in the Forbidden Lake. Forbidden because many people went missing in it. She learns its spirit, represented through a blue light, seeps through the water, land, and plants. And when the people eat those spirits, they take in some of their power too.
Their language can be heard in places the world has never been spoken before.
What If writer Ryan Little crafted this episode over 4 years. He says the goal is to offer the most accurate depiction of every Mohawk costume, basket, and tattoo. Animation allowed Marvel to be precise. Using the Mohawk language, he says, helped fill out the story with full period accuracy.
So just to totally showcase them as a people, it felt like we wanted to take the full ride and not hold anything back.
Little says for the latest season of What If, Marvel uses Kahorti to build on traditional Mohawk teachings and beliefs, using animation to go back into the past in ways few comics and movies have before.
She ventures towards this sort of local legend of theirs called the Forbidden Lake, that all they know about is it glows with power and anybody who enters it disappears. And so she sort of explores it in a moment of duress and ends up having a gigantic adventure and cool Marvel things ensue.
While Little wrote Kahorti's first adventure, he hopes a Mohawk writer will get to write the next. He worked with the Mohawk people throughout the process, including historian advisor George Conatillo. He helped the Marvel team accurately depict what village life looked like, the environment of their traditional territory within the Adirondack Mountains, and the appearance of the native peoples.
This is a new, entirely new, innovative way of looking at indigenous people. And it destroys all the
worst light in Detroit right there. Nobody ever goes through it on the other side.
It's a start, at least. And George Conatillo says depicting indigenous peoples in a positive manner, as Marvel is doing, could help change the way Native kids see themselves. For NPR News, I'm Eva Kukach in Syracuse, New York.
Kukach.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. Jews, Muslims, and Christians typically worship at separate institutions. In Omaha, Nebraska, the Tri-Faith Initiative works to close that gap both physically and spiritually. Now its members are working to support each other and withstand the strains on relationships that have come with the war between Israel and Hamas. Nebraska Public Media's Jolie Peel reports.
On the Tri-Faith Initiative's campus, there are 4 buildings. There's a mosque, synagogue, church, and an interfaith center. A bridge named after the prophet Abraham connects them. The initiative started 17 years ago as an experiment to bring different faith communities together to learn and understand one another. Executive Director Wendy Goldberg says the interfaith community is concerned about the impact of the war.
We are worried about our ability to withstand the tension from outside of this beautiful beacon of light to tear us apart, to make us take sides, and to break down the beautiful dream that we have built here and replace it with fear.
On a recent chilly night, people came to the Tri-Faith campus for a silent candlelit vigil. They walked along the Abraham Bridge, grieved the lives lost in the Israel-Hamas war, and prayed for an end to the violence. Abdul Maki, the secretary for the American Muslim Institute, says Arabs who come to pray at the mosque have connections in Palestine, Lebanon, and Egypt.
It's heart-wrenching, right, to see people who look like you and talk like you being collectively punished and the death toll continues to rise.
Mackey says to members of the Muslim group, it feels like the world's governments are just watching as the violence continues.
Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise.
We invite all those who so choose to rise in body and or in spirit.
Rabbi Benjamin Scharf leads Temple Israel on the Tri-Faith campus. He says the Jewish community has been hurting since the initial attacks on October 7th, and their anguish has grown as the war continues.
Just as we went through the process of learning about everything that transpired and awaiting further information, only to be heartbroken over and over and over again.
In an effort to overcome the fear and anxiety that's come as a result of the Israeli-Hamas war, the Jews, Muslims, and Christians at the Tri-Faith Initiative are showing up at each other's prayer services. Reverend Sarah Rental-Jones at Countryside Community Church says the Christian congregation recently held its own silent vigil as the members of the church worked to support and understand the pain of their Jewish and Muslim friends.
We just felt like we could offer space and presence, and we felt as though silence would be better than making an attempt at words that might fall short.
The leaders at the Tri-Faith campus say they can't control what's happening overseas, but they can control their relationships with each other. Goldberg says overcoming religious barriers and building those relationships begins with simple discussions.
We need to sit together in small conversations and believe that peaceful proximity is possible and that the world is watching to see if we can maintain it here in Omaha, Nebraska.
It's a message of hope from an alliance of the three religions as they work together on one campus. For NPR News, I'm Jolie Peel in Omaha.
You're listening to All Things Considered here on Michigan Radio. Thanks for being with me this Wednesday. I'm Catherine Frisky in for Rebecca Kruth. I hope you're doing well as we close out 2023. You know, education isn't a top voting issue, so why are Republican presidential hopefuls talking about schools so much? We'll hear that story just ahead here on All Things Considered on Michigan Radio.
Here at Michigan Radio, our staffers like big books, and we cannot lie.
The book that really grabbed me this year is called...
Best book that I read this year is... My favorite book that I read this year was The Mirror.
This book literally has it all.
I'm Brianna Rice, a reporter at Michigan Radio, here for me and my colleagues about the books we love this year.
Brianna really leaving us hanging there. Find out about those Michigan Radio staff book recommendations tomorrow on Morning Edition and on All Things Considered. Support for Michigan Radio comes from Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center, committed to memory and aging research, clinical care, and education. A statewide effort conducting studies to help further dementia care and treatment. Learn more at alzheimers.med.umich.edu. Support also